Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games. I am Harry, and before we go any further, please make sure to hit the like button down below and subscribe to our channel if you're interested in some more board game related content. Now, the topic for today. Today we'll be discussing the top or best games for children who are in the autistic spectrum, right? Kids who have been diagnosed with autism or with ASD, autistic spectrum disorder. This video comes from my own personal experience with my child. My son was diagnosed last year with ASD. And these are some games that I've played with him. As you could see from my background here, my backdrop, I am big into board games and I love playing board games. So that's definitely something that I've wanted to pass down to my child. And there are some serious challenges that come with this kind of activity when it comes to teaching this kind of activity to a child who's on the spectrum. My son is 4 years old, so today I will be focusing primarily on the age range of 3 to 5 years old. These are games that I think will be very, very helpful for kids within that window of age. Now, going forward, sometime in the future, I might, if this video gains any interest, I might consider doing a list of games that I think would be appropriate or likely to be successful with older children who might be on the spectrum. However, that list would be more about conjecture and prognostication. It's more of my, educated guess as to what might work with a kid on the spectrum, as opposed to these games, which are games that I feel confident based on my experience of playing with my son and how those gameplay experiences turned out. So first, before I go to the actual games, the games that I'm recommending or suggesting for kids who are on the spectrum, I just wanted to share a few general points, a few ideas that I considered and factored in as I was making this list and as I was thinking up of this video. So first of all, some guidelines, some principles, if you will, as far as deciding what games you think might work, because everybody has a different collection, everybody has different interests. Some of these games might not interest you, they might not work necessarily with your child, or you might have some other games in your collection that you would like to teach them. But I feel like as long as we follow these principles, I think it's possible you could just take these principles and apply them to your personal interests, your personal game taste, and your personal game collection. So first of all, I think that games that have a tactile aspect to them, a physical aspect to them, the ability to develop and practice and utilize a child's fine motor skills, I think these kind of games lend themselves to that demographic of a kid on the spectrum, right? Children in the spectrum, at least from my personal experience with my son, really, really like to get, involved with things, to get that physical touch, right? They don't just want to watch something. They don't just want to observe that something. Pieces on a table displayed before them are too much of a temptation for them to resist. They want to touch it. So a game that actually encourages and requires the touching of the game board or of the components of the game, again, I find to be very helpful in getting the child interested and immersed in that experience of playing the game. So that's one principle. Another thing is, I think games that have an element of problem solving are very, very helpful in order to gain the interest and retain the attention of a child who's on the spectrum. And again, in my personal experience with my son loves to solve puzzles. He loves to put things together, tear them apart, and see how they operate, see how they work. He likes the challenge of seeing something that's incomplete and working towards its completion. That is something that fascinates him. That's something that intrigues him. That's something that motivates him. And these kind of activities are the activities that I find he can, last a longer periods of time partaking of these activities. While other activities that don't have that stimulating problem solving aspect to them, they lose his attention rather quickly. So if you can find games that some way, somehow involve some sort of a problem to solve, some sort of a puzzle to piece together, I think these can be very, very helpful games in gaining the interest and attention of your child on the spectrum and in teaching them the wonderful world of playing board games. Another thing I think that is very important is player involvement, right? So, let me explain what I mean by player involvement. Some games are very passive in nature, and they're very, they create lots of opportunities for players to be idle, which is great for adults, and it might work great for typical children or older children. But at the same time, it's tough to expect a child on the spectrum to passively and idly wait by until their next turn comes, right? It's awesome to teach turn order, and that's absolutely one of the things that I do when I play games with my son. I teach him the importance of waiting for your turn. Now it is my turn. Now it is your turn. However, when I'm referring to games with player involvement, I mean games where some way, somehow, whether directly or indirectly, every player is involved in every turn of the game, right? Sometimes they're directly involved. You are doing something to them or with them. And sometimes they're indirectly involved because what you are doing affects what they might do afterward, right? So whether it's direct involvement or indirect involvement, but that engagement, that aspect of gameplay, which keeps them, awake, it keeps them alert, it keeps them attentive, it retains their attention and helps ease the tension, right? The tension of waiting for your turn. I want it to be my turn already. But you know what? You're so focused and enthralled by what's happening on the other player's turn that you almost forget that it's not your turn. These are the kind of things that I'm talking about when I mean player involvement. Some games, again, are very, very passive, and what the other player does has no involvement or no relevance to you and your game. And that's fine, again, when you're talking about older children, adults even. But when you're talking about a young child on the spectrum, you want to keep them feeling involved and feeling relevant from turn to turn. And that, I think, is a very, very important principle. Another thing that's helpful, and it's not always going to happen because not every game has this, but preferably, if possible, simultaneous turns. And this kind of piggybacks on player involvement, right? So simultaneous turns are games, refers to games where there is no turn order, right? Not necessarily that there's chaos and there's no structure, but players are each making their choices and their actions, or taking their actions at the same exact time, right? Again, that eases the tension of having to wait for your own turn. It keeps the player feeling involved. They still have to follow some other aspects of structure, because even simultaneous turn order involves some sort of rules or some sort of structure, and that's important to teach children to follow rules and to follow structure, but at the same time easing the tension of having to wait for their turn. And finally, I think the last positive thing that I'm going to mention for this list of principles is quick gameplay, right? And what I mean by that is you want the games to not last too long. And what's quick to an adult and what's quick to a child that's on the spectrum are two different things, right? So I'm thinking a game that plays from 5 to 10 minutes is your preference. Definitely not beyond 15 minutes. Because again, it's hard to retain their attention and their interest in that activity, in that project, right? So I find that it's better to play a 5 to 10 minute game 2 or 3 times in a row if the child shows interest, than attempting to play a 20, 25, 30-minute game even once with the same child. So again, the quickness of it all, the fact that the resolution, whatever outcome you are waiting for, whether it's the completion of something you were preparing, or whether it was crossing a threshold before all the other players, accomplishing something before everybody else does, whatever might happen, if that resolution can come within 5 to 15 minutes for that child, that is preferable. So those are the positive principles that I would like to share. Now, I do want to share a few caveats, a few cons, a few no-nos, a few things to watch out for that I think are not necessarily helpful. Now, first of all, I don't think that roll and move, your typical traditional roll and move games, I don't think they're suitable for children on the spectrum. First of all, I'm not a big fan, honestly, as a board game addict myself. I am not a big fan of the roll and move mechanism, but I find that for children, it's a hard, tough pill to swallow, right? You roll a die and you must move the amount of spaces or whatever that the pips on the die show. That can be very, very frustrating and very limiting, right? And a child on the spectrum, they want to feel in control. They want to feel like they're doing something, not like they're just being told to do something. There's some independence that they want to exert. At least that's what my experience has been with my son Nicholas, 4 years old. And that's okay, right? We want to teach them rules. We want to teach them turn order and turn structure, but at the same time, it's okay to give them a little bit more control in what they're doing and the decisions they're making. So roll and move, I think, is something to avoid. Also, again, piggybacking on the player involvement, we don't want games where the turns, other players' turns are irrelevant, right? Like if the other player is doing something and it has no effect on my game, it's just their game, that can be, again, a little bit of a disconnect for the child because they kind of lose interest and it makes it harder for them to sit back patiently and wait for their next turn. I would say avoid games that have lots of cards maybe or lots of bits in the child's supply, because that can be a distraction, right? Quite often kids on the spectrum could be easily distracted, and you don't want to create the opportunities that are outside of the game to distract them, right? You want most of the bits and pieces of the game to be concentrated in the game proper. That way the child is focusing his or her attention on the actual game. If they have too many bits and pieces or too many cards, again, that can be a distraction and it can turn their attention away from the game rather than for it, right? Because they're not necessarily looking at the bits and pieces and strategically plotting their next couple of moves, right? That you know, for a young child on the spectrum, they're playing from turn to turn, right? But if they get immersed into whatever it is, component-wise, that's on the outskirts of the game, again, it could be harder to reel them back in to the game and to focus on what's at hand. So those are the principles, the guidelines that I would like to share for choosing games for children who are on the spectrum. Again, the games I'm about to share as representatives may not exactly work for you and your child, but you might have experience with games. You might have a big game collection with lots of games that are, you know, recommended for children of young ages. And again, if you could apply some of these principles or any of your own that you want to share, feel free to comment down below and let me know some of your ideas, some of the things you might have disagreed on with my opinions, and just some of the things that you think I might have missed. That would be awesome. But right now we're going to get to the heart of the matter, the actual games. It's only 3 games, guys. Only 3 games. You know, I try to teach my son a few new games every couple months. And these are the 3 that I find have stuck the best and have worked the best. The first game I no longer own, and it's called Go Away Monster. And Go Away Monster is a game where players each have a player board, and the player board represents their bedroom. And it has a bed, and it has a place for your bed, right? A silhouette for your bed, a silhouette for your pillow, a silhouette for a teddy bear, a silhouette for a toy ball, a silhouette for a picture frame. And you have all of these pieces that you fill up your player board, your bedroom player board with, but they're all in a little bag and you must draw blindly from them. But within that same bag that has enough beds and teddy bears and pillows for all the players playing, there's also a group of monsters, right? So you're trying to, you know, fish through the little bag blindly and pick out the pieces that you need to fill out your player board. So if I already have filled my player board with a bed, when I put my hand inside the bag and I feel pieces that feel like a bed, I'm clearly trying to move on and forget them and try to find something else that I do not have. And again, there's a bunch of different shaped pieces of monsters in there. Now, for an adult, this game is very, very easy. You can easily distinguish from the different pieces there. But for a child, it can be a little bit more challenging. And again, this involves a tactile experience. You know, kids are getting, you know, very close and up and personal and touching the actual pieces of the game. It's very involved. Turn order is very quick, but even within another player's turn order, you're kind of paying attention because you're curious and interested as to what the other players are going to pull out of the bag. And once they pull something out of the bag, well, then your little brain starts working and deducing and realizing, hey, there's one less pillow in the bag, so let me think about that, right? So again, it's very involved, and it finishes really, really quick. And it's been a game that I've had some success with playing with my son Nicholas. Now, another game, and this game I do own, that has been successful for my child is Zingo. And Zingo is basically, as the name indicates, it's a children's version of bingo. I don't know what the Z stands for, zany or what have you, but this game, every player has a player board, which is a 3x3 grid with different images of different objects, different animals, you know, different things that we are taking out. We're drawing 2 tiles each turn, and if you have one of those images, the tiles have the images of the different possible images. If you have one of those images on your player board, you have to be the first player to grab it and then put it. And again, this is kind of simultaneous play because there is no turns, right? We just, you know, push out, you know, these, there's this little gadget that cranks out the 2 tiles per turn. You just crank them out, you read them out loud, and whoever reacts to it first, you know, realizing that it's on their player board, they need it, grabs it and puts it on their player board. Again, really, really neat. Simultaneous turn. There is this quickness involved in it, right? You know, one of the challenges is that a child, you know, spectrum or not, can get pretty upset every time someone beats them to the race of grabbing that tile. But over the course of time, their instincts speed up, they process the information a little bit quicker, and they get even better at that aspect. Again, very physical. You're grabbing these pieces, you're touching them, and you're placing them on your player board. It's very educational for kids who are still picking up and learning their vocabulary, because again, each of these images has a word underneath it, so you learn the word, you learn how to spell it, and you learn a picture representation of whatever that word is. Really, really cool. It plays really, really quickly. I'm talking about 5-10 minutes max. This game is done. And again, really, really fun experience for kids, maybe between ages 3 to 5. And finally, the last game that I will be sharing for today is Animal Upon Animal by Haba Games. And Haba has a lot of great children games, but I will say this, Animal Upon Animal, I feel like is the best one I've played from a Haba line. I've played maybe like 4 or 5 of their games for children on the spectrum, because again, it follows lots of the principles that I'm talking about. It has a very tactile experience, very, fine motor skills, development experience here, because the kids are stacking, you have a base crocodile, a wooden crocodile, and you have a bunch of other wooden animals, and you're stacking turn by turn. You're stacking these animals on top of one another without trying to make the whole thing crumble, because you're trying to be the first player to get rid of all your animals. You have a supply of 7 animals and you want to get rid of them before all the other players. Now, what's really cool, again, besides being tactile, there is a problem solving. You're trying to figure out how to put these pieces in the optimal way, right? Because if I put it in a certain orientation, or if I put it on a certain part of the pyramid that you're constructing, the tower that you're constructing, it might not work, right? It might be too, the weight might not be distributed right, or the angle just might not work. You're trying to solve the puzzle of trying to put this piece in the best place possible out of all your possible options. Player involvement is actually not that much of a struggle, because beyond the fact that, yes, there are turns and players have to wait for their turns, but there's the curiosity and the interest and the anxiety of watching your opponent put a piece and hoping that as they put their piece, a bunch of things fall down so that they have to take back more animals into their supply. Also, you're rolling a die, not for movement, but to determine what you're doing, right? How many animals you're stacking, where you're stacking them. But when you roll the die, sometimes the die makes you have interaction with the other players. It makes you either give an animal to another player so that they can stack it for you, or it makes you ask one of the other players, hey, pick which animal I'm supposed to stack this turn. So again, players feel involved on other players' turns. And the game plays pretty quickly. I mean, even if players struggle to, get their animals on, eventually someone's gonna get rid of all their animals, and it's not gonna last too long. I feel like 15 minutes is as long as I can envision this game being played. The one challenge about this game, and it does go kind of against one of my principles, is the fact that it has bits and pieces that, while are part of the game, at one point are set aside as something kind of separate from the game, right? As a supply. The kids have this supply of 7, and it could even grow bigger, animals. And sometimes the kids might get distracted. Now, my experience has been with my son Nicholas is that I always, let him know we're going to play the game. And after we're done with the game, you can grab these pieces and play with them a little bit, right? The idea of free play, or treating them as toys, but at the same time respecting the confines of the game, the structure of the game, the rules of the game, and that the overall purpose of this box is to serve as a gaming experience. And I've been very, very successful in having that happen. And again, I think the player involvement helps with that distraction factor, because he feels so involved on my turns. He's not so easily distracted by these animals. So these are the 3 games that have been successful for me with my son Nicholas, who is on the spectrum. And again, some of the principles. Again, one day I might consider doing a video. Comment down below if you'd be interested in just my hypothesis of games that would be helpful or successful, gaming experiences for children on the spectrum who are older than 5 years old. If that's something that you're curious about, please comment down below and let me know. But as for now, these are my games for ages 3 to 5 for children on the spectrum. Thank you so much for watching us here at When Harry Met Board Games. Again, I'm Harry. Don't forget to hit the like button down below, and please subscribe to our channel if you're interested in some more board game related content. Thank you very much, and take care. Bye-bye.